Okay, so then here we have the water and plasma membrane. So remember that in the previous slides, I did say water can diffuse across the plasma membrane. So water can squeeze between the phospholipids and the hydrophobic core. So you do have diffusion, but this diffusion is actually kind of slow. It's not like it has a free pass like ethanol or gas molecules. Water actually has a tough time squeezing through the hydrophobic tails of all those phospholipids. Now, there's these special proteins. Now we're going to talk about these transmembrane proteins and proteins that are embedded in the plasma membrane. So aquaporins, these are special proteins, and aqua referring to water, and pore, the little pore in the membrane. So these aquaporins form a little channel that these water perfectly fitting these water molecules. So these water molecules can now freely diffuse into and out of a cell. So aquaporins, they're a way faster way of these water molecules diffusing from one way to other. So yes, your general biology professor was right, and all the textbooks are right that water can diffuse across the plasma membrane without aquaporins. And given the overall area of a water or the plasma membrane and the abundance of water in the extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid, yes, water can diffuse, but aquaporins are a way faster way of speeding up this diffusion across the plasma membrane. And this is what we call facilitated diffusion. Now, instead of just having the plasma membrane and free diffusion, you actually have a protein that helps to facilitate and speed up the diffusion through the plasma membrane. And this is very important. It'll come in very handy when you encounter MD3, especially when you talk about the renal tubule and the kidney. Aquaporins are very important in terms of maintaining water homeostasis and balance, and how your kidney is able to regulate the volume of water in your urine and also in your blood. All right. So the thing about aquaporins is that they're selective and they fit water just perfectly, but they block other things. So things like sodium, they can't really pass through the hydrophobic membrane, why, or hydrophobic core of the plasma membrane. Again, remember their positive charge, and that hydrophobic compounds or the hydrophobic core blocks pretty much prevents all these polar highly charged molecules from freely crossing this hydrophobic core. And the thing about aquaporins, even though these are small ions, they do not fit in these aquaporins. So these, again, aquaporins only allowing water through. Now, some big molecules, big solutes, again, if there's a large solute, they have a hard time passing through the plasma membrane. They also can't pass through the narrow channels of an aquaporin. So again, this is how the aquaporins are able to facilitate the diffusion of water molecules, but not let any old molecule through. Okay, so say you have all these aquaporins, right? So here we have a plasma membrane, we have two solutions, relatively equal amounts of water, but there's much more salt in this, or much more sodium ions in this side of the barrier. Okay, for the sake of this demonstration, let's just say this membrane is impermeable to without any additional proteins. Okay, let's just say this membrane by itself is impermeable to water and sodium. So what we have here is that, again, a hydrophobic core. This is repelling or limiting the diffusion of water across the membrane, and also repelling and preventing the diffusion of sodium. Now here we have a bunch of aquaporins, and remember, aquaporins are only going to allow the diffusion of water. Water is relatively the same, but something special happens. So the thing is that, remember, your body, it's not just your body that wants equilibrium, it's also nature and physics. So the thing is that you have an imbalance in the concentration of sodium ions. We have way more sodium ions per water molecule in this solution on the right versus this one where it's relatively like dilute, not too many sodium molecules and not too much water and a lot of water. So the thing is that with your equilibrium, now nature is going to try to balance it so that you have an equal amount of attraction between the water molecules and the sodium ions on both sides. In other words, it's going to try to balance out the concentrations of sodium molecules. So what is it going to do? Well, these aquaporins, remember, only allowing water. So water is going to diffuse across this to generate a more balanced amount. So this will lose overall volume, but now we have roughly the same about equal concentration and ratio of water molecules to sodium molecules. Now it's more imbalanced in terms of concentration. And this is what we, again, remember, these are aquaporins, so these aren't allowing sodium ions. And this is what we call osmosis. So we're talking about the movement of a solvent across a selectively permeable membrane. And selectively permeable, just saying that a freely permeable membrane allows everything to cross it. An impermeable membrane would be like how it was without the aquaporins, or if it didn't allow the diffusion of water. Impermeable means no movement. Freely permeable means all movement. Anything that's a shade of gray in between, where allow some things through, but not all things, that's selectively permeable. In this simplified example, we showed that water can move through, but sodium cannot. Ergo, it is a selectively permeable membrane. Now, in the very broadest sense of osmosis, it's just talking about solvents and something you can dissolve things in. The main solvent in your body is water. So when we're talking about osmosis in the body, we're talking about dissolving water. Theoretically, we can talk about osmosis in terms of lipids or dissolving things in other things like other solutions like DMSO. But in terms of your normal physiology, we're just talking about water. Water is the main solvent in your body. So we're talking about the movement of water molecules across a membrane that allows some things through versus all things. So the funny thing about osmosis, in 4 years of teaching the undergraduates, it always seems like a sticking point for everybody. Like this is the one that separates the topics from the A's from the B's. It just takes a little, I guess because it's at the molecular level, it's really hard to get a concept of how these molecules move, why water is attracted to these sort of like solutes that attract water. So I like to use this analogy. So pretend like you have a bunch of students, right? So you have a bunch of students, and the students in this case are analogous to the water molecules. So here we have a bunch of students, and just like we have a bunch of water molecules in the solution. So we have an equal amount of students in both rooms. Now, the thing is that these students have a bunch of snacks here, whereas these students have a lot more snacks over here and this side of the room. So, the thing is that right now they're shut off. The doors are shut. They're not able to freely diffuse and move across the two rooms. But what happens if you open up these channels that allow the students to move between the rooms? Well, notice that there's very few snacks right here. So the snacks are being like analogous to the solutes. So what's going to happen is that these students are going to diffuse across this portal. And again, this is selectively permeable. Why? These snacks can't move by themselves. They can't move through this door. So pretend these snacks can't move through this door. Therefore, this plasma membrane, this wall separating the two, is selectively permeable. So now these students are going to the area of higher concentration of these snacks. So just like water molecules move from an area of low solute concentration to high solute concentration, same with like people with two different rooms with different concentrations of these little goodies. These goodies kind of attract the water molecules, therefore it's going to kind of balance it out, so now everybody has a roughly an equal amount of these goodies. So just like the students are water molecules, the solutes are like these little snacks.